What's up, guys? So I've pretty much finished with this motor here. I got all the pistons mic'd out, and I got most of the rings mic'd out and corrected to the measurements that I want. And basically I figured I would just show you real quick how that's done, more or less. So this is the number 4 piston there, and there you can see the rod. So yeah, basically the first step when you're putting the pistons in the block is to measure the piston. So you do that with a micrometer like this one, and basically you're going to put this around the base of the piston at a certain measurement. All pistons have a different measurement zone, and to get a measurement of the piston, and then you're going to take that measurement of the piston and you're going to measure the inside bore of the cylinder with the bore gauge that you've seen before, this guy right over here. And you're going to take those two measurements and basically come up with a number, and that is the piston to wall clearance. On this particular motor I'm shooting for about 3/1000ths, which is pretty tight. This is going to be more of a daily driver car. So yeah, that's the first step, and then you're going to be able to install the pistons based on those and mix and match them depending on what those different numbers are. The second step is you're going to take your piston rings, and I've already done this with these piston rings, and basically this is the second compression ring. You're going to press it in the block, and I have this little tool here, nothing fancy, and it just gets it level inside the block. Kind of hard to do this with one hand. So level in the block, and then you see there's a tiny gap. I don't know if you could see it right at the end there, and basically that gap is your ring gap. Now, to get the correct ring gap, you're going to use a little feeler gauge, kind of like these. I like to use metric system. That's what most of the civilized world uses, so I don't really use imperial, so mine are in millimeters. And basically you're going to try and push that into the ring, and you will be able to tell what measurement you're looking at. So like I said, I've already done these. They're already cut to what I want. But if they're not, say this was too tight, you would take it to this ring filer. I have a pretty basic one. There's much nicer, much more expensive ones. Hold it up on there and slowly shave away piston ring until you get a measurement that you're comfortable with. The biggest thing is to go slowly with that. It's much easier to take away more of the piston ring than it is to add piston ring. And what I mean by that is, if you take away too much and the clearance is too loose, you will have to buy a new piston ring. You can't add on to the piston ring. So yeah, that's that step. And then what you're going to do, or what I like to do, is I have these little tiny files, and I just file off the edges, any roughness off the edge of the piston ring there, and that way there's no burrs or anything that's going to get caught up in the piston or in the cylinder. So then you put those in the piston, and there is a specific way to do that. So you'll take your piston, and basically these guys are going to go in on one side, so like that, and then you can push it all the way around the piston like this. Lift up that edge, and they just pop in. If you try and force it, I know there's piston ring extenders which maybe make this a little easier. I've never tried them. This is always the way I've done it. It's pretty easy. You don't need a special tool, nothing fancy. So yeah, I know people have tried to maybe like bend it and force it, and the piston ring will explode. So that just helps you avoid the piston ring exploding. So yeah, I'm gonna finish putting the rest of these rings in here, and then we can put the piston inside the block. Alright, so the rings are in the piston. They do have a specific orientation. Usually when you buy the piston, there's a sheet of paper that kind of tells you how they should go. So yeah, the next thing you're going to want to do is get the wrist pin in here. So there is wrist pin clips that come with the pistons as well. And those guys look just like this. And you're going to take the backwards edge, or I guess backwards side, and you're going to install the wrist pin clip just like that. And basically that's just because when you put the piston inside the cylinder, it'll be impossible to install that from inside the block. So you want to do that first, and then you're going to put the piston in a piston ring compressor, something like this. So you're going to want to get this nice and lubed up. I'm going to try and do this with one hand. So get some lube on there. Basically just spread that stuff around. And the piston goes inside of this. Tighten that up and start to put it in the cylinder. And then I like to just use a hammer and kind of hit the piston down into the block, like a rubber mallet, not like a huge hammer, but just like a rubber mallet, just like this guy. Just give it a couple taps, and I'll watch the rings from this little viewing area here and just make sure none of them are getting caught on the block. Loosen this a little. Okay, now I can start to see the rings seating into the block, and they don't look like they're binding. Everything looks okay. Alright, a couple more good taps, and the piston has entered the block. It shouldn't feel rough. I mean, it should go in pretty smooth. I mean, just, you know, you can see one little tap is obviously going to have movement on that, and if that is not the case, then something is wrong and you should restart. And so this is where the wrist pin is going to go, in this wrist pin hole, and basically you've got to line up the rod as you put the wrist pin in to connect the piston and the rod together. So put this a little lower until you can see the wrist pin from the piston in this hole, and that all kind of matches up in there. And then you can get the rod matched up and everything kind of looks good. So I'm going to put the wrist pin in and you can have a look at what it looks like. Alright, so I have got the wrist pin in there, as you can see, and basically you're going to take the other clip and attach it to the same point on the outer portion of the piston. So that guy is just going to go in there. And with that, you have basically assembled an EJ block, or at least the fundamentals. So yeah, I hope this video was helpful, at least a little bit. I don't know if I would build an engine 100% based on this video. There's a lot of skill and tips and tools that I left out. If you're interested in a more in-depth video, I can definitely put one together showing more details to the process. I would consider this more as like a quick look, as maybe if it's something you want to tackle but you haven't really done any research, you don't know how. So yeah, I will see you guys later, and you know, maybe I'll make another video assembling the long block. Peace.